Uh, Welcome everyone. So welcome to yet another session. So his work focuses on computer vision, deep learning, and medical image analysis. Currently, he's working on extracting valuable information such as for treatment planning using deep learning on inexpensive medical modalities. So, and before joining IIT Bombay, he also worked as a faculty member in the department of Tripoli at IIT Guwahati, and also taught a course on machine learning. So we are very glad to have you here today with us, sir. And now I hand over to you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Shrey. Yeah, so like many of you, I'm also an alumnus of IIT Guwahati, but I was not a student, I'm a faculty alumnus. So some of you might be familiar with my continued participation in some Facebook groups of IIT Guwahati, IIT Guwahati Current Rollers Janta, for example. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about cancer pathology. So my work primarily is in diagnosis, not so much in treatment, but in treatment planning of cancers. And for that, I work closely with doctors at Tata Memorial and University of Illinois Chicago. And the whole idea is that basically whatever pathologist is doing when they are looking inside a microscope to look at signs of disease and severity of disease, instead of that we will extract that information and perhaps extra information using computer vision, deep learning, etc. So currently how the process works is that you stick a needle into the tissue, like a cancer tissue, take it out without disturbing the structure of the tissue at the microscopic level, and then you prepare a glass slide, like the one that you see here. This glass slide, so actually the tissue is before this, the tissue is cut very thin, and it is put in formalin and paraffin so that it does not degrade, because otherwise tissue degrades very fast. Now this tissue is so thin that it is actually translucent, but these pathology images that you see where you have this pink and purple color, that is because of some dyes that are put on this tissue. So once those dyes are put, the purple dye, which is called hematoxylin, it highlights all the nuclei. It is absorbed by the nuclear material, and it highlights the shape of the nuclei. And the pink dye, which is eosin, is spread throughout the tissue through the connective tissue segment, which is called stroma, and so forth. So you get this pink and purple colored basically slide that is put on the stage of a microscope. And if multiple pathologists want to look at the same thing, for example, you could have a senior doctor training a junior doctor, then you have these multi-headed microscopes in which both can look at the same tissue, and then the trainer or the trainee can move some arrow to basically highlight different portions of the tissue. Now instead of that, the main bottleneck in digitizing the whole thing is this scanner, which is an expensive machine, and most pathology labs, most surgical pathology units, they don't feel the need for a scanner. Now this scanner will scan the entire slide, so it has an inbuilt microscope. It will scan the entire slide, and this 1 inch by 2 inch slide may be converted into 100,000 and 200,000 pixels. So it becomes a gigapixel image. We are talking about megapixels on phones and SLRs. This is going to be a gigapixel image. So it's a huge file. Each image for one slide itself can be 1 GB or more after compression, and that is stored in on servers. And now what we can do is this scanned slide can be projected on the screen, and it can be projected in even using a projector, so that so many people can look at it at the same time. You can even look at it virtually using a teleconference from another place, and you can do telemedicine based on that. So that is one aspect of scanning the slides and digitizing these images. Then these glass slides, they otherwise occupy a large space in a slide library. So that physical space now can be converted into a virtual space where you have server farms or you have cloud storage where you will store these digital slides. So that's how the entire thing will change. And the more important aspect that I'm interested in is that once these are scanned, then we can use machine learning to do different tasks. So now the tasks that you can do on machine learning, they actually come in, there are different hierarchies of those tasks. So I will come to that in a bit. Okay. Uh, so I guess I'm teaching to the choir here, which is what is machine learning. This is just a cartoon depiction of a classifier that is looking at two different features and trying to draw a boundary between two different types of patients. Uh, so what we have been doing with these slides is we have started with automating what a pathologist does, and then now we are moving towards beyond the capabilities of a pathologist, doing better than a single pathologist. So it's I think pertinent to like quickly show you um the hierarchy of tasks. Let me do that. Sorry, I'm jumping between slides now. Yeah. So in using AI, the kind of task that you can do with medical imaging can be as simple as delineating anatomical structures. So, for example, find all the nuclei, find this type of nuclei versus that type of nucleus in pathology, or in radiology, it can be finding different kinds of objects in the image. So here is an example. So let's say this is a slice of a lung CT. One could be that we simply classify each image into whether there is a calcified nodule present or absent in this image. So disease or normal, right? And then second kind of task could be object detection, where we are not only classifying but also telling where exactly are these nodules. So obviously, to prepare this data requires working with medical practitioners who will actually figure out what is to be what is important to detect and where is it in these images. So they will mark those, and then we will train computer vision algorithms on that. And then you can think of semantic segmentation as a slightly more difficult task where you have to color each pixel based on whether the nodule is present or not. And yet more difficult task could be instance level segmentation, where you have to actually find different instances of the same object type. Now here it is straightforward because these two nodules are very far from each other, but in, for example, in pathology, sometimes the nuclei are crowding with each other, so it becomes a little difficult to do instance level segmentation. So this is from a computer vision perspective. From clinical utility, this is roughly how the order is. You go from top to bottom. First is to just clearly delineate anatomical structure. So where is the heart? Where is the lung? Where is the ventricle of the heart? Where is the nodule, etc., etc. And then the second level of intelligence could be mimic the experts in doing simple diagnostic tasks. So if we have called this lung CT as abnormal, it's not just classification that is important, but also showing what is it that it has found and where is it, because of which it is abnormal. Uh, then, so after the first two bullets, we are getting into areas that go beyond human capability, but that is also possible with carefully prepared data. Relate structures and patterns that you see in images to the underlying disease state. So what I mean by underlying disease state is basically the molecular makeup of the disease. So for example, if you look at a cancer is increasingly not treated as a single disease. It is treated for the specific mutations that are driving one patient's cancer. So, for example, even in lung cancer, some cancers are EGFR positive. EGFR is a gene, right? So, if the EGFR mutation is there, then the cancer will behave in a different way. It will be it will respond to different therapies than an EGFR negative cancer. So, finding that underlying disease state itself is important. Now, how that is currently done is the kind of slide that I showed you, the pink and purple. Before putting that pink and purple dye, instead of that, you take another section of the tissue and you put a special kind of dye which is called IHC, immunohistochemistry, which is very specific for one type of protein. It will mark one type of protein and it will show you brown color. And if that brown color exceeds a certain threshold, then it is then that particular protein is a marker of that mutation. And then base, so for example, in breast cancer, it can, there is ER, PR, and HER2. These three IHCs are used along with that HND that I showed you, the pink and purple that I showed you. So so finding that just from a inexpensive imaging modality. So for example, in CT, now there are startups that are looking at CT images, and based on how the nodules look slightly different between EGFR positive versus EGFR negative cancers, they are able to predict that using CT itself up to a certain degree of accuracy using deep learning, right? So which pathologists or radiologists themselves cannot do most of the time. Okay. Maybe there are some very senior and experienced radiologists who can do that, but it's hard to pass that knowledge on to the trainee radiologists. However, with a suitably large collection of images, deep learning can do this task fairly well. The next level of task would be predicting treatment outcome using these whatever you see in the image. So how will you prepare a data for that? Is actually you will take past data, and you would take past data for that cohort of patients for which the treatment was well defined, and they were followed up for, let's say, at least 5 years. So now you know within those 5 years which patients remained treated, for which patients the disease came back or they died, and so forth. So with this past knowledge, if you have that level of foresight to collect this data of 10 years ago, then you can train a model to actually predict the course of the treatment itself for that patient, right? And then hopefully it will work for patients going forward. So with that, you can actually do very precise level of treatment planning for a patient to see whether a particular patients will be treated with treatment A or will be treated with treatment B, and so forth. Right? So that is basically the level of sophistication. And then finally, basically, how do you build explainable logic? So as you anyone who has worked in deep learning knows that deep learning, although it works very well for very well defined problems, it is not very explainable. It doesn't, we don't know why it makes its decisions because you cannot probe it very well. And that's the trade-off that we have made for doing the complex decision making. So I tell doctors all the time that don't expect explainability, but we will give you accuracy. If that is okay with you, then we can work together. Otherwise, uh, you're better off using simpler machine learning or statistical models that are more explainable. Okay, so coming back to this, yeah, so this is one of the first problems that we worked on, and this was during my time at IIT Guwahati. That's why you see that the ranked number 1 team is from IIT Guwahati. And I shouldn't take credit for it because the students themselves were quite enterprising in participating, finding the challenge, participating in the challenge, finding ingenious techniques to work on the neural network and so forth. Then these are the days of when we had a K40 GPU, and they didn't like it, so they just worked on their laptops. We had a single GPU in the lab that is near the design department, not even in the electrical department. Uh, so the idea in this, the objective was that this is the brown stain that I was talking about. So there are 3 different kinds of brown stain that are used uh, in uh, in breast cancer. One of them is called HER2 to find the occurrence of HER2 protein, which is a marker of HER2 mutation. So these blue dots that you see are nuclei of the cells, and once you put the HER2 marker on that, HER2 IHC on that, if you see only very light brown, then it is HER2 negative. If you see dark brown, then it is HER2 positive. But just the darkness is not important, right? So basically, the entire cell should have a very intense brown pattern at its membrane. Okay, not inside the cell, but at the membrane of the cell. Okay, so you'll see this complete structure enclosed structure, that means it is HER2 positive. It's a protein that is only on the membrane of the cell. So if you see these patterns that you see in 3 plus, then it is HER2 positive. Otherwise, on the other hand, you have 0 or 1, which are negative. In between, we have 2, which is equivocal. If a patient's slide comes out to be equivocal, which is 2, then they are sent for an even more expensive test, which is called a FISH test. And you can see that merely doing image processing to find brown color is not going to work, because here you have more intense brown than one of the 3 plus, but you will see that the boundaries are not completely enclosed in this 2 plus, and that is an indication of that it is equivocal but not positive. And there are differences in how different labs prepare tissues. So the tissue, if you train primarily on tissue coming from one lab, it is not going to work very well on tissue coming from another lab, even if you use the same magnification on the microscope or the scanner. So that was the idea. And what helps the pathologists in this is that when they have the entire slide, they not only have the patient's tissue, like these 2 segments that you see, they also have a control tissue. This control tissue is known to be HER2 positive, and you can compare these two. If the patient tissue is almost as intensely stained as the control tissue, or more, then it is also positive. So most of the other teams did not know what to do with the control tissue. What the students from IIT Guwahati, what they did was, they looked at the other section, which was HND stain, right? The one that had this purple and pink stain. And they found that if we match the shape of the tissue segments to the tissue segments in the HER2 slide, then we can eliminate all the patient segments, and what will be left is the control segment. So that's how they located the control segment. And from that control segment, they extracted the average color. And back then, even our deep neural networks were not very deep. This has only 5 convolutional layers. So after the 4th convolutional layer, they injected 3 extra inputs, which is the colored intensity that they extracted from the control tissue, into the midway into the neural network. So with conv layers and these control color extracted, uh, then we had the dense layers, and after that we had the HER2 score for the patient. And based on that, our HER2 score was pretty good, and that's how these my students got the top position in that competition. So this is a visualization of a slide, and this is the heat map that is generated based on the output of the neural network applied to different patches from the slide. And when you see that some of these are marked blue, which is HER2 score 0, green is score 1, yellow is score 2, and red is score 3. So if we zoom in, we see that these are indeed score 3. This look like score 2, 1, and 0. So that was the basically mimicking what a pathologist does. But then we decided that let's build something that is beyond what a pathologist can currently do. So here we started looking at things like, if we take the tissue where we know what happened 5 years later, can we predict directly from the tissue whether the treatment will be successful or not? Currently, how it is done is, you look at the tissue, or the pathologist looks at the tissue, and he or she grades the tissue in grade 3, 4, or 5. And once the grading is done, so grading tells you how aggressive the cancer is. Then there is something called staging, which tells you how advanced the cancer is, whether it is locally within the organ, or whether it has gone to lymph nodes, or whether it has gone to distant organs. And type of cancer, which means either the shape and structure of the cancer cells, or the molecular markers that I talked about, like HER2 and ER and PR and so forth. So based on that, they decide on a treatment. And after the treatment, the outcome comes after a few years, whether the patient survived, whether there was a recurrence, whether there was pathological complete response or not. So why do this grading, which is very subjective, although it is predictive of the success of the treatment, but it is not perfectly predictive. So why not skip that and directly look at the outcomes? So you treat the input about the patient, the image about the patient, and the treatment plan as inputs and put it in a machine learning model to see what is the predicted output, which is predicted survival, either disease free survival or overall survival. So that is what we wanted to do. And why it is relevant is so we started with something called prostate cancer. So in prostate, this is a cancer of elderly men. It usually strikes after 60. So this is a slide of prostate, and you can see this ring of cells that have uh, that you can see here, and another ring of cells here, another ring of cells here. Here you can see that the cells are forming a ring, but the ring is undulated. So this is actually normal, where you have long strings of cells forming a cavity in between, this white cavity. That cavity is called lumen, and it's typical of many glands in the body, including prostate, including colon, including breast, and so forth. This is where all the whatever the organ is producing gets collected, and these are connected like pipes of, like the branches of a broccoli or a cauliflower, and they get uh, funneled into like bigger pipes, and then they get, for example, the milk comes out of the nipple, or the seminal fluid from prostate goes out of the urethra, and so forth. Um, so that's the structure of the organ. And these, if you see this, not so small circular structures, but long, elongated and irregular structures, that is actually sign of normalcy in prostate, at least. When these glands become small and circular, that's a sign of a low grade prostate cancer. When even the circles disappear and they all merge, like here you see, then it is grade 4. And when there is no structure at all, then it is grade 5. So the for grade 5, we know that it is immediately we should do very harsh treatment. uh, but for grade 3, usually they don't even treat the patient because it's a slow growing cancer, and most likely the person will die of old age before the cancer kills them. So but in between you have this grade 3 plus 4, which means that most of the cancer is grade 3, some of it is grade 4. And the person is not that old. At that point, should we simply remove the organ? Should we irradiate the organ with the radiation treatment, or should we give hormonal treatment, which is effectively chemical castration? So these are very harsh choices, and but these are sometimes necessary, although they will lead to a lot of change in the quality of the person's life. These are sometimes necessary to save their life. But in mid-grade cancer, do we need a harsh treatment, or do we simply remove the organ? So for this kind of choice, there is no clear answer, and that's where something like machine learning can help. So we had access to a data. This is called TMA, which is a tissue microarray, where you have very small segments in circular, taken by circular needles. Uh, it's not a complete slide like I showed you earlier, but it's basically they try to sample it from the worst portion of the tissue so that it is representative, and you can fit several of them in a same slide. So we had this TMA data for a matched cohort, which means that we had two arms. One was where the cancer came back within 5 years of surgery, recurrent, and the non-recurrent arm was where the cancer did not come back in 5 years of surgery. So now we know that with higher stage, there is a higher chance of recurrence after surgery. And it actually, the race also affects. So for example, African American men, they are worse affected by prostate cancer than Caucasian men. So here they had a matched cohort so that these factors don't matter. So for every stage 2 person in the recurrent cohort, they had a stage 2 person in the non-recurrent cohort also. So with this matched cohort, we were supposed to build a predictive model that can predict whether the cancer will come back or not within 5 years. So and for each patient, we had 4 cores. Now, so there is some due diligence that one has to do for machine learning when working with medical data. One of them is that if you have 4 images from one patient, you cannot take 2 of them for training and 2 of them for testing. The reason is that because the neural network can actually start to predict based on patient specific characteristics as opposed to disease characteristics. So the kind of structure that you will have in one image from that patient will be very similar to the structure that you will find in another image from the same patient. So you cannot take the same image, for example, and divide it into four parts, treat one part as training and the other part as testing. That will not work. In the sense that you will get very high accuracy, but it is not ready to do good predictions on new patients. Any questions so far?
No, sir. No, there seems to be no
Okay,
question.
right. So you should at least separate these out at a patient level. So let me show you what is the level of separation that one needs. Right. So at least one should do validation by separating patients out. If you have the resources and a large team, then you should have, let's say, a hospital A and B for training and C for testing. This is using patients A and B for training and C for testing. And this is populations, which means that you are even looking at you trained on images from India and UK for training, and you are testing on China for testing. Okay. That's the highest level of validation you can do. And uh, even better would be that you change the equipment also. You worked on MRI from Philips and Siemens, and then you are testing on MRI from GE. If that works, then you have a very general AI model. Otherwise, AI models are very specific to the type of patients that you have seen, the hospitals from which the images came from, etc. Okay, so if you train AI models on from TCGA data, which is primarily American and Caucasian, and you try to apply it to Tata Memorial, it will not work, because let's say we take the example of lung cancer. Uh, they have lung cancer screening programs, so most of their cancers are at an earlier stage. In Tata Memorial, people come only when they self-diagnose cancer, and which is usually at a later stage. Then in US, very few people smoke. In India, a lot of people smoke. So a lot of our cancers are smoking driven. So in lung cancers, you will see carbon deposits in tissue from Tata Memorial, which the machine would not be trained to see, and it will make an arbitrary decision that will be less accurate than if it is purely trained and tested on American patients. So these are all the issues with medical AI. That's why one has to be careful about making claims about medical AI with just a small data set. Okay, so here this is from the pre-deep learning days. How we approached this problem was we had uh, an expensive computer vision uh, software that we use to basically build a segmentation model, and with that segmentation we could separate out all the glands and the connective tissue, the stroma and the nuclei and so forth, as separate objects. So this is sort of like the hierarchy of objects. We have the entire image, which is separated into epithelium, which is the gland, stroma, which is the connective tissue. Epistroma is something that we are not sure whether it is epithelium or stroma. And lumen is that white cavity, and debris is whatever has fallen in that white cavity. And then within epithelium, we have nuclei, cytoplasm, and other things, etc. So once we have all these different types of objects which fall into one of these categories in the tree, then we can extract different metrics for them. For example, what is their size, what is their shape, what is their texture, what is their color, etc. So consequently, we have around 6,000 images, 6,000 features per image. But we have, so it's a high dimension, low sample size problem. In medical data sets, usually you have a few hundred to a few thousand patients, but you don't have 1 million images like ImageNet. You can chop images of one patient into multiple sub images and treat it as multiple sub images, but then make sure that your training and testing images are separate at the patient level, not at the patch level. Then you are fooling yourself, right? So we extracted all these kind of features, and then we built a, a lasso type model, L1 regularized SVM or L1 regularized logistic regression. And depending on how many features we use, if we use a lot of features, then we had 0.95 AUC, otherwise we had 0.81 AUC. So AUC is sort of like a balance metric between type 1 and type 2 errors for all thresholds. And we could also highlight the which particular feature contributed positively or negatively to the decision that we made. So now the advantage of this non-deep learning model is that it helps us understand the biology better. So for example, we can take one particular feature and see, so this is lumen border index. So whether the lumen is jagged or whether the lumen is smooth, that tells you whether there is more chaos or less chaos in the cancer. So here you can see that the lumen cavity is very smooth. These are less likely to recur. And this is a similar grade cancer, but the lumen boundary is quite chaotic. So it's a more likely to recur. So after that, we started working with breast cancer, but starting to go towards prediction of treatment failure. So not only is the cancer different between different patients, within the same patient, sometimes you see heterogeneity. So if you look at one particular cancer slide, you could have different looking cells here than another portion of the same tumor. And it is quite possible that differences in their appearance is also because the differences in their genomics, which means that one, they can be like two different clones of cancer that could be driving different portions of the cancer. uh, but the current treatment paradigms are such that you treat for the dominant clone. So there is enough evidence in literature that heterogeneity, if you have multiple different subtypes of cancer within the same person, then they are less likely to be treated by the primary treatment. So but the treatment protocols haven't evolved to dual therapies yet, but hopefully they will come soon. So we want to first establish, we want to add to that body of evidence that cancer is heterogeneous, and heterogeneous cancers are associated with poorer survival. So we wanted to do that, but then we couldn't find a good definition of the heterogeneity itself. So our first task we took upon was to define what is heterogeneity. So usually if you mine like different parts of the tissue and then you do a gene sequencing on that or RNA sequencing on that, you would find that it has a certain mix of genes, and then based on the established subtypes of cancer that have different treatment protocols, we find whichever is the nearest one, and we assume that it is that patient, it is that type of subtype of cancer. uh, but what we saw was, okay, um, but let me show you the evidence of heterogeneity. uh, so what happens is that if you look at HER2, going back to HER2 mutation in breast cancer, you can see that all these three patients are HER2 positive. Okay, because all of them have a certain more than 10% of cells that are completely enclosed with brown structures. But obviously, something is different between the patient on the left and the patient on the right. What you see in the patient on the right is that there is substantial portion of cancer that is not HER2 positive, which means that this patient on the right is probably having a heterogeneous tumor which has more than one type of cancer. So if they are HER2 positive, they'll be treated with trastuzumab, which is an anti-HER2 therapy, but they will not be treated with hormonal treatment, which is for ER positive cancers. So it's possible that this person needs both treatments, and can we detect that? So we started with the two more dangerous types of breast cancer, HER2 and basal. So if we have a detector that tells you whether it is low HER2 or high HER2, whether it is low basal or high basal, then we will expect that those who are low on both HER2 and basal will be the luminal, which is neither HER2 nor basal. Those that are high on basal but low on HER2 are basal. Those that are high on HER2 but low on basal are HER2. But what if they're intermediate on both? And that's what we are calling as intratumor heterogeneity, ITH samples, heterogeneous samples. So how do we identify that? So we looked at three different molecular markers, the microRNA, RPPA, and DNA methylation data. And we were looking at two different types of patients, the HER2 and the basal patients. And they are shown with two different colors, green and red. Okay, so you can see that if you plot the patients for the two most expressive microRNA uh, readings, then they are the red cluster and the green cluster are quite separate in all three technologies. But you see that they are not completely separate because you see some patients are intruding into the other cluster. So you can see, for example, this red is intruding into the green cluster, this green is intruding into the red cluster. So we were quite intrigued that what do we do about these patients. So our first goal was that if we don't look at IHC, if we don't look at molecular markers, if we don't look at these genomic sequences, gene sequences, which are expensive technologies, can we simply detect HER2 and basal using H&E stained images? Right. So for that, we did not want to include those patients that were heterogeneous. We only wanted to train and test on homogeneous patients. So we manually picked out patients that were going into the other cluster and took them out. We did not use them for training. So the idea was that you take the whole slide, mine patches from it, and train the neural network to recognize the patch based the classify the patch based on the class of the patient, whether it is HER2 patient or basal patient. And earlier this was before deep learning, so we made a bag of features model where we uh, did this HOG interest points and then HOG features and SVM, and we got pretty decent results. Patients that were high on basal were indeed basal. Patients that were high on HER2 were indeed HER2. Patients that were low on, so these are held out patients that were low on both. So these are two different classifiers, right? So this is classification of one classifier, this is classification of the other classifier. And that the patients that were low on both were neither HER2 nor basal, and they were luminal. And then in the middle, we found some patients that were both basal or so they had intermediate scores for both of these. And these are precisely the patients that were intruding into the other cluster, the heterogeneous patients. Okay, so that was our initial way of basically showing that there are pockets of HER2-ness and basalness in different parts of the tissue. And when we visually look at it, the heterogeneous HER2 pockets look like similar to the homogeneous HER2 pockets. The heterogeneous basal pockets look like the same of as homogeneous HER2 basal pockets. But now we still haven't defined what is heterogeneity. So if you look at there are some 50 genes that are supposed to be highly predictive of the behavior of breast cancer. They are called PAM50. So we cannot visualize in 50 dimensions. So we reduce this using t-SNE to 2 dimensions. t-SNE is a very useful tool for that. And that is only for visualization. But here you can see that different types of cancers are shown with different colors. Each dot is a patient in that 50 dimensional space. So we define heterogeneity as a patient that is close to its own cluster center. So if you look at the black, which is luminal A, if it is close to the luminal A center and it is far away from all the other centers, then it must be pure luminal A. Something that is, so if you look at the ratio of the distances from other clusters versus its own cluster, and if it is not relatively close to its own cluster, then it's a heterogeneous cancer. And we did not look at just distance, we looked at Mahalanobis distance because the spread of these clusters is different from each other. So based on that, we can divide the luminal A patients. See, luminal A is what all the doctors would treat the same way. They will give them hormonal treatment, right? So for luminal patients, if we divide them into pure versus admixed or heterogeneous, we saw that clearly the survival for the pure patients was better than those for heterogeneous patients. So what is here in the x-axis is time after treatment. Y-axis is survival probability. Initially, all of them are alive. Okay, in the long term, all of them are dead. Obviously, we are all going to die. But then the separation of the curves is what matters. So here we can see that patients designated as pure, they have better survival than those that were admixed. So that means we have proposed a good metric for heterogeneity. And we can also see that if we look at pure versus admixed patients, their other characteristics are also different. Admixed patients are older in age. They are more likely to be menopausal. They are they have a higher proliferation. That means the cancer is spreading faster. Their tumor size was not very different, but uh, they had a tumor that was whose stage was larger. And now, if you look at their molecular characteristics, their proliferation again is higher. Proliferative gene, ORCA gene, is higher, and their sum of several different molecular markers for proliferation is also higher. Recurrence, the chance of cancer coming back is also higher, and so forth. So looks like our metric is good. Now we are refining this matrix using something called non-negative matrix factorization. So you think of all these genes as they are prototypes of different subtypes of cancer that are mixing with each other with some positive non-negative coefficients. Unlike principal component analysis, where the contributing bases and their weights can also be negative or positive, in non-negative matrix factorization everything is positive, which is what gene expression is. Gene expression is not negative, and the mixture of genes can also not be negative. So we used NMF, and that we are getting even better results than what I'm showing you on the screen now for predicting survival probability. So now the question is that if you look at this inexpensive image, an HND stained image, can we detect mutations without having to do expensive IHC or FISH or genomic tests? So that is the goal. Can we mark this up with like pockets of HER2 positiveness uh, on this entire large slide gigapixel image using deep learning? So that is what we started to do. So we looked at two adjacent sections of the tissue, one marked by IHC, the other marked by HND, so that we can train a neural network to recognize HER2ness with subtle changes in the tissue in HND itself. So some very expert pathologists can do that, but they are not very reliable and they cannot teach it to others. But with the deep learning, we hopefully you can just copy the program to another computer and it will work. So we took this L shape, looks like this L shape must be the same gland, although it's not the same slide. But they are like very close parts of the same tissue in 3 dimension. So once we map that, patches mined from this area can be given as positive samples to the neural network. Patches mined from this area can be given as negative portions to the neural network, and these are non-cancer regions, the green one. So we had a multi-stage deep learning pipeline. We do some color normalization after, so that the tissue extracted from one lab looks like the tissue from another lab. Then we have the first deep neural network that marks all the cell nuclei. Then we have a second neural network that divides them into cancer versus non-cancer, and we have a third neural network that marks cancer cells into HER2 positive versus non HER2 negative. And for detecting nuclei, we had a UNet type architecture, and this is the result of all the marked up cells. So you can see even when the cells are touching each other, they are very crowded. Still, we can mark them as separate cells. It's a because we hand annotated more than 20,000 nuclei, so we were able to do instance level detection and segmentation. So these are the cells that were detected. And then we had another custom neural network which marked the tumor, and a similar neural network for marking HER2 positive and negative. And these are the sample results. So this is the IHC image. You can see it is quite negative. And here most of the cells that are marked by the neural network are negative, which is blue dots. Here you can see that these are positive cells, and those that are marked by the neural network are also positive, the red dots. Green dots are the non-cancer cells, which are outside the glands. And then there's a strong, so then we extended this to using deep learning to mark the 4 different types of breast cancer: basal, HER2, luminal A, and luminal B. And whatever was predicted by gene analysis, we were able to mark that with a ResNet 50 quite well, for not for all images, but for a good subset of images. But that good subset is exciting research result. It's not a clinically valid, relevant result yet. So just showing the better images. So now the question is that what if we don't have annotations, right? So here there's another cancer, it's a thyroid cancer, and here we have to detect BRAF positive mutation versus BRAF negative, which is no mutation. And here you can see the IHC has a different staining pattern. What we are not after is that IHC collecting in these lumens, but we are more concerned about IHC staining the cells themselves. And it's a very diffused form of an of staining, in the sense that we cannot pinpoint where exactly it is positive or negative. So can we detect now that this BRAF mutation using uh, HND, which is inexpensive, and this IHC is not even available in most hospitals. Here the treatment again is different for BRAF positive versus BRAF negative cancers. So here we used weakly supervised learning, something called attention based multiple instance learning, where we don't mark the regions because we cannot mark them. And all we do is we extract some features using a pre-trained VGG network, and then we have an attention mechanism. That attention mechanism basically tells you which regions are giving you either the strong positive or strong negative signal, and which regions are not giving you any clear signal of positivity, BRAF positivity or BRAF negativity. And based on that, we got very good AUCs and very good PPVs and NPVs, positive predictive values and negative predictive values. And with some manipulation of the output of the neural network, we were able to produce these attention graphs. Here you can see BRAF mutated cancer, and the hotspot here shows where the BRAF positivity signal is coming from, without having any annotation to tell us, to help us train. And here it is telling us where the negativity is coming from for a BRAF negative cancer. And what you can see is that wherever there is, it is neither red nor blue. That means those are the regions which may not even be cancer, because they're not even giving you any signal about strong BRAF positivity or negativity. And if you look at the adjacent section, the serial section IHC, we can see that this is roughly the same tissue, the same gland, and you can see that there is a particular shape of the cells, whereas here the shape of the cells is different. So these are called oncocytic cells, and these are called classical papillary cells. So some doctors have previously observed that oncocytic cells are likely to be BRAF positive, but that knowledge could not be reliably replicated from doctor to doctor. Now here we are confirming what the doctors already had a hunch about using machine learning. So this is something that we are trying to publish now. And behind the scenes, we do a lot of other things such as color normalization. So if you look at this tissue, its color is slightly different from this, although both are H&D. The reason for difference in color is because they might have a different scanner that has a different color response. They might have a different uh, company that gives the H slide and the H dye and the E dye, and the colors of different companies are slightly different. And because of that, if you train only on data from one type of color response, it will not work on images from another color response. So we have to change this to the same on to the color response of the training data without changing the structure. So we have to color normalize it and produce an image like this. So again, here we use non-negative matrix factorization. We first convert from the brightness space to the optical density space by taking a log transform, and then we separate the log color response of each pixel into two different stains, the hemotoxylin and the eosin, using non-negative matrix factorization. And then we use the contribution from the original tissue, but the color basis from the other tissue, and recombine it to create the normalized image. So now this image looks like the color space of this image here without changing the structure of the image. So this algorithm of ours is used quite well in the computational pathology community, because we release the code also, we open source the code. And this was in collaboration with TU Munich, Technical University of Munich. And then our nucleus detection and segmentation is quite robust now, because we trained on 7 different organs using more than 20,000 hand marked, hand annotated cells. So here you can see that if you see a dark cell like this, it is very easy to segment it as a separate nucleus. But many nuclei in cancers, they become enlarged and there's a white portion that appears inside. This entire thing is one nucleus, and it is very difficult to segment that without using deep learning. And then you can have touching nuclei, two nuclei touching each other. So in instance segmentation, this has to be a separate instance, this has to be a separate instance, this is a separate instance, this is a separate instance, etc. So because we have a very large data set that we produce, in fact this was done in IIT Guwahati. Anytime someone came to our lab and said, I want to learn deep learning, we said, okay, you hand annotate 1,000 nuclei and then we will teach you deep learning. Okay, so that also tests their commitment, and because of that we get very good results now. And we launched it as an international competition uh, in MICAI 2018, and then follow up we had another competition in ISB 2020, where they had to also classify different types of cells, not just segment them, but also classify them into 4 different categories: epithelium, lymphocytes, macrophages, and neutrophils. Presence of these, the 3 different type of cells that you see on the right, they are from the immune system of the body. Their presence indicates whether the cancer will be more aggressive or less aggressive, and so forth. Because sometimes they kill cancer, sometimes the cancer reprograms the immune system to help itself. So these are the results of the top contestants in our competition, and you can see they come very close to the ground truth. The other type of works that we are doing is basically trying to characterize the tumor microenvironment of, in the sense that what are the milieu of different cells that are around a tumor and how does it relate to the outcome of treatment. So here we are using graph neural networks. So we have a convolutional neural network that detects all the nuclei as the white dots, and then we form graphs from the nuclei. So the graph is based on a certain neighborhood limit, that within 40 pixels which are the other nuclei present. And once we have the graph, then we can feed it into a graph neural network and predict the output. And we have an attention mechanism in one of the graph neural networks that we used that also tells where the decision is coming from, spatially speaking. So for example, if you look at in situ breast cancer versus invasive breast cancer, the difference is in situ cancer has this layer of cells that define a very sharp boundary around the cancer clusters, and our attention mechanism highlights them quite well. And this is a chaotic invasive cancer. Here there is uh, no such highlighting. In Gleason 3 prostate cancer, the Gleason 3 signal comes from the round shape of the glands. Without us telling the neural network, the attention mechanism can figure that out. Then we have convolution neural network based color normalization as well. And then we also work on methods such as active learning. In active learning, you are, let's say, if you have a large unlabeled pool of images, and we want to not randomly sample images that we want to label, but we want to intelligently sample them using an algorithm. So that algorithm is called active learning algorithm. So here we are using self supervision to figure out which so we train a self supervision algorithm on the labeled pool and apply it to unlabeled samples. Because it is self supervision, the labels are self generated. So when we apply it to unlabeled pool, the ones that are misclassified as per self supervision, those must be the hard samples, and those must be the ones that must, if we label them, we'll get an improvement in the classification network. So that was our logic for pretext based active learning, and we got better results than some of the previous methods. Other thing that we work on is robust classification, where we assume that some of the training data is misclassified, its labels are wrong. So what we do is we look at the loss after few iterations of training and model it as a beta distribution. In beta distribution, those that are at the tail end, those must be the hard samples because their loss is high. So we will not treat them as reliable samples, and we will work with the samples that are on the left side of the beta distribution and use them for training. So with that, we get better training than cross entropy, L1 loss, and generalized cross entropy. We also work on multi-resolution neural networks. So this is a unit type architecture for segmenting very large images. But here, what we are also doing within each block of the neural network of the unit, we have multiple we downscale the image within the block also and combine features from multiple scales, and with that we get better results, because some of the structures that you want to detect, they can be detected by looking at fine features at the cell level and some at coarser features at the gland level. We also work a little bit on self-supervised learning for better initialization of neural networks, and that gives better results than training on ImageNet for a domain-specific task, such as working on X-ray images. Right. So in general, there's a lot of work to be done in deep learning applied to medical images. But the high value problems lie in collaboration with medical professionals who are willing and willing to like listen to you, and you're willing to listen to them. So if you find a partner like that, a collaborator like that, then it's a very good very satisfying experience to work on medical images. And for a country like India, where we don't produce enough doctors, this can give a boost to our healthcare system going into the future. Okay. Any questions?
No, there seem to be no questions. So,
Okay.
uh, thank you, sir, for this wonderful and insightful talk. And uh, so, yeah, do you mind sharing your slides with us so that we can forward these slides to if anyone is interested?
Sure, I'll send it to you.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. We are going to end the session now.
Okay.
And thanks again, sir.
All
Uh,
right.
bye.
Thank you.